Hello YouTube, I'm Efring225 here with another SRPG Studio tutorial video. Today's video is going to cover two topics, unit fusions and unit transformations. Let's start with fusions. To edit fusions, go to your database, go to the config tab, and click on the fusion settings button under visual. Now, what are fusions exactly? Well, they picked a really weird term for it. I don't know why they decided to call it fusions, but fusions are basically anything that allows one unit to be carrying another unit, i.e. the rescue command, the capture command from Thracia, and even pair up. Now, you cannot replicate the 3DS game's pair up functionality exactly. There's no way at this point to make dual attacks and dual blocking work. There's going to need to be some serious scripting work in order to make that even possible. But you can do a couple of things that are like pair-up functions, so I'm going to go over all of that in this video. So, first things first, when you create a new fusion, you can select an icon for it. The icon that you select will be blinking over the unit's head when they are doing the whatever the fusion command is going to be called. So we'll just pick any old icon. And you can name the fusion whatever you want. You can give it any description you want. These don't show up in game. What does show up in game are the catch, release, and trade fields. These are what the commands are going to be named. So the catch command could be named just rescue. That's not how you spell rescue. It could be called rescue because that's what the command is going to show up as. Release is, of course, when you drop the unit. And trade is when you want to swap the unit from one carrier to another. Now, an important field here is this filter button. This selects whether or not you can, it basically selects what units you're allowed to use the command on. So we have player, enemy, and ally. Maybe you want to make it so you can't rescue NPC characters. Ally just means the green units. And action after release is what state you want the unit to be in after they are dropped. If you select wait, they will have used up their turn. And if you select remove, they will be taken off the map entirely. This does not count as a kill, remember. They will just be taken off the map. So maybe you want rescuing to work that way. Maybe you want somebody to be able to eject somebody from the battlefield without killing them. That's possible. That will be, of course, what you select if you are making a capture command. I'll get into that in a little bit. And if you select none, then the unit will retain their turn after they've been dropped, if they haven't taken their turn already. I think. I've always selected wait for this option, so I will have to test that. So the type is either normal for when you are picking up your own units, and fusion attack means that you will enter combat with your target, and if you kill the enemy in that combat, then you will capture them, or you will pick them up. So yeah, I don't really know why they want you to select a filter for it, because if you select normal, then you can't pick up enemies with this command, and if you select fusion attack, then it only works on enemies. So I don't really know what the point of the filter field there was. Anyways, these two checkboxes allow unit trade. This allows you to swap the carried unit from one carrier to another. And the allow item trade means you are allowed to trade items with the carried unit. Now note that only the person carrying the unit can trade items with that unit. So if you are making the capture command, it's not going to work exactly like Thracia, because with Thracia, any unit adjacent to the carrier could trade with the captured unit, but that's not the case here, unfortunately. Unless, of course, there is a plugin that modifies this. I have made a plugin to modify the fusion functions myself, and I will talk about that later. So in the Details tab, you can adjust a bunch of other settings here. Stat changes during fusion is the changes to your stats while the fusion is occurring. So in other words, you know how in the GBA games, if you were rescuing a unit, then your skill and speed would be halved. I think that's how it works. So you can go over to skill and select constant, set it to 2, and then select divide, and then while the fusion is occurring, skill for the carrying unit will be divided by 2. But there's more. You can also make it. You can also feed a variable into this if you like. And this tab right here, child, what does that mean? Well, the game refers to the unit that you are carrying as the child unit. So what we can do here is that we can actually make the stat modifier based on the child unit stats. So like, for example, we could say What tab is this? Modify the carrier's defense by the child's defense, just as an example, divided by 10. So yeah, it is possible to create a pair-up styled command, because with what I've just done, now when a unit rescues using this command, their defense will be buffed by 10% of the carried unit's defense. Just like in Awakening pair-up. I think that's how it works. All of your stats get buffed by 10% of the stats of the unit you are carrying. So I will talk more about making a pair-up command later on in the video, but first I want to go through the rest of these fields. Required capacity basically means that you can make it so that the command is only possible if a comparison of the carrier and the carried unit stats returns true. Of note is the enable parameter bonus. This means that it will factor in the class bases when making the comparison. So for example, you can do what I did here, which was to make it so that rescue is only possible if the rescuer's build plus strength is higher than the target unit's build plus defense. That's never been done in a Fire Emblem game before, but you are totally allowed to do it here if you so choose. I do not choose. Source condition and destination condition basically means if you want the source to have a certain class weapon or item in order to be able to do the fusion, you can set that there. Same goes for destination, however destination applies to the target instead of the rescuer. And stat changes in battle during fusion. These are the modifications to your stats during a fusion attack, so this only applies if you are making a capture command. Keep that in mind. And finally, we have skills and transformation. This is the really interesting part. You can basically make it so that the carrier will take on the personal skills, class skills, weapon skills, item skills, or even any skill granted by a status condition of the unit they are carrying. And you just tick whatever boxes you want and you're good to go. And I think that's a really interesting function. I've never really seen anyone use it before. And one other thing you can do is that you can make it so that carrying a unit causes a transformation. And we'll go over transformations in just a minute. But yeah, you just pick whatever transformation you want, and the unit will take on that form whenever they are rescuing with this command. Really, really weird. I don't know why that's a function. I don't think it's based on any sort of feature in any of the Fire Emblem games. So I don't really know why it was added, except they thought it would be cool. And I think it's cool. So it's there if you want to do it. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind is that any fusion that you make is not enabled by default. You actually have to go into your difficulties menu here and then go to default enabled fusion, and then you can check whichever fusions you want to be enabled for all units if they meet whatever conditions you set. I don't know why you have to set it up in the difficulties menu. I don't really know why you would want a fusion to only be available on a certain difficulty, but whatever. There you go. Fusions don't have to be enabled for every unit that meets the conditions. You can make it so that skills enable a particular fusion. Like, say, if you want to make the Savior skill, I think that's what it's called. It basically allows you to rescue without penalties. So if you do make that sort of fusion, you can enable it with a skill. You just have to click the little bubble here that says fusion, and then under skill effects, you select whatever fusion it is. And there you go. You can also make it so that items enable fusions. Or I think if you use the item, it causes the fusion. I don't really know. I've never played around with this before. But you can select fusion. It's a little bit cut off the screen there. You can select fusion in this little drop-down menu that determines what the item's effect is. I don't really know why you would do that, but there you go. Now, I talked a little bit earlier about making pair-up. So, as you know, pair-up works a little bit differently from rescuing. In rescuing, Unit A picks up Unit B. But with pair-up, Unit A is picked up by Unit B. And by default, there's no way to make a fusion that does that exactly, but we can fix that by adding a unit command. The good old unit event commands. So I have already set this up, so I will explain what it all does. As you can see, I have made the pair-up command, and the condition for this is going to be, let me get it on screen here. The condition is basically going to be that the active unit must be within one tile of a player unit. I've selected all there because I was experimenting with maybe pairing up with your enemies. I'll talk about that later. So it's very simple. All you have to do is use our favorite command, extract map position, to prompt the player to select what unit they are pairing up with. If they cancel out of it, then self-switch A will trigger, and then we will just skip the event command entirely if self-switch A has been flipped. Then you have to put the ID of the unit that was selected into an ID variable. And then you are going to use a command that we have not gone over in these tutorial videos so far, unit fusion. I will show you where it is. It is under battle, and it is down here at the bottom, unit fusion. This will allow you to trigger a fusion arbitrarily. You can use this in cutscenes as well, by the way, and we've seen plenty of examples in Fire Emblem of unit fusions being used in a cutscene, so there you go. So what you want to do is the unit that you select on the left here will be the unit that is picking up the unit on the right. So the unit on the right, under target unit, should be the active unit, and the unit on the left, the carrier, is going to be the unit whose ID was stored in that ID variable earlier. You can set what fusion it counts as, and the type is simply just select catch in order for unit A to pick up unit B, and there you go. That's basically pair up in a nutshell. Oh, and ignore these other two things, by the way. That was part of an experiment. They're not related. So yeah, that's nice and simple. But, as you all know, there's more to pair up than simply being picked up by another unit. When you are paired up, you can do this thing called switching, and you are going to need another unit event command for that. Luckily, I have made one. So let's talk about how this switch command works. The condition for this is going to be that you can only use this switch command if you are actually carrying somebody. So basically put what I have here. Put whatever fusion is the pair-up fusion into this field. Put active unit into the unit field, and then leave everything else. I don't really know exactly what most of this is for, but it works, so this is what I used. So the first thing we have to do is store the active unit's X and Y coordinates to a variable. This is going to be important. And then we are going to use this change variable command. We have to put the active unit's fusion child ID into the unit ID variable. So this is what it would look like. Fusion child ID down at the bottom here. And once that is done, you can use the unit fusion command again to release the units. All you have to do is put in the active unit, and they will release whatever unit they are carrying. And then you have to use the unit fusion command again in order for the just now released unit to pick up the active unit. And then you have to use a move unit command in order to move the unit whose ID was stored in that variable earlier to the X and Y coordinates that we stored earlier. Because remember, because the thing is, whenever you use the unit fusion command to release a unit that's being carried, they will just go wherever they want. They will go in whatever direction they get released in. You cannot release them onto the same tile that the carrier was on. So you have to store the active unit's coordinates into those variables so that you can move the newly released unit back into those coordinates. So that it works like a proper switch command. Oh, and I nearly forgot one thing I should warn you about with the pair up command is that I couldn't really figure out a way to make it so that you could not select the pair up command if you were already carrying somebody, because you're not supposed to be able to pair up if you are already carrying somebody. But I couldn't figure out how to make the command go away if that was the case. So someone in the comments will probably fill me in if that's possible. Right, so you've got pair up, you've got switching, and you know how to make bonuses based on the carried unit stats. But, of course, in Awakening, there were more bonuses for pair-up than just whatever the stats of the carried unit was. There were bonuses based on what class they were and what support level they have with the carrier. Now, it is probably possible to implement all of that, but I am not really going to go over it in detail because it seems like it would be very, very difficult to do. So I will just give you like the basics of what you might try in order to make adding bonuses based on supports and other factors possible. So one thing you can do is that you know that in these stat changes during fusion fields, you can feed a variable into this function, and that will just use the variable as the stat bonus. As for where to modify that variable, you could do it in the pair up unit event command that you just made. So like it would calculate what all of the bonuses are supposed to be and then feed all of that into the variables after you've paired up. But the problem is calculating all the bonuses so that they can be fed into that variable would be really, really difficult and cumbersome, so I don't really want to go over a possible method for doing it. All I'm going to say is that you could use the pair up unit event command and the switch unit event command to do all of your calculations before feeding it into the variables for the pair up. And the variables, you would actually need like a separate variable for every stat of every unit that is possible to modify through pair up. Yeah, that's going to be very, very troublesome if you want to do all of that. But if you want to do it without a plugin, and then, go ahead. And if any plugin writers are thinking of maybe writing a plugin to fix all of that so it's much easier on the developer, that would be very cool too. Alright, so I've gone over unit fusions. Now onto the second topic, transformations. Now, unit transformations are luckily a lot simpler. Unit transformations are basically changing from one class into another temporarily. So in this menu here, we are going to create a new transformation to demonstrate. I don't really think the icon name and description really matter. Like, I don't think they show up in game at all. Class naturally is what class you transform into. And these two fields here allow you to select an animation that will play over the unit when they transform or untransform. And cancel information determines how you want the transformation to revert, if possible. So, for example, it could revert automatically after a certain number of turns. That's what this field is for. Or it can be a command that the player has to execute themselves. So, command revert. Simple. Nice and simple. This lets you do a number of things. You could make dismount from the SNES Fire Emblems as well as Three Houses by simply making dismounted versions of the classes and then having all of the classes that can dismount be able to transform into those dismounted versions, and then they could mount back up whenever they wanted. Nice and simple. Now, under details, you can make it so that there is a stat requirement to be able to transform. You can make it so that you can only transform under whatever conditions you set in these fields, like based on whatever property of the units you want it to be. And we have item conversion, which is a nice little function you can take advantage of if it suits your fancy. It basically means that whenever the unit transforms, if there's an item in their inventory, then it will transform. Like, for example, I can make it so that items should not be tradable after conversion. Oh, okay. I guess that was just a little reminder. So yeah, you can make it so that all of the units, for example, ultimate swords in their inventory turn into energy lances. Like, if you want to be weird like that. A more practical use for this would be if you are creating a Laguz class, then you would naturally want the Laguz's weak punch attacks to turn into a fierce claw attack or breath weapon whenever they transform. So that's what this item conversion function is primarily for. I mean, you could probably do some weird creative things with it as well. Now, as to how to make the transformations trigger in-game, you can make it so that items trigger a transformation. There is a setting down here. That's off the screen. Let me get that. Transform. You just select transform, and then in the item effects you select whatever transformation the item triggers. You can also make it so that transformations are triggered through a skill. So all you have to do is go down to transform, click that little bubble, and then you can select how much EXP you get when you transform, the command name for the transformation, and whatever transformation the skill triggers. I don't really know why you would grant EXP for transforming. Oh, right, and one other thing I forgot to mention about unit fusions. If you try to make an enemy pick up a unit through like a cutscene or an event, they just won't be able to do it. SRPG Studio arbitrarily prevents enemies from picking up other units, even other enemies. So what you could do if you want to be able to do that is I have a plugin on my GitHub. I'm going to link to that in the description. You can download that and just put it into your plugins folder, just drop it in, and enemies will be able to perform fusions. in cutscenes and events only, of course. The AI does not know how to pick up units, and I guess you could mess around with the AI if you wanted them to be able to do that, but you can't without additional plugins or scripting. So that's unit fusions and unit transformations. They are very, very flexible, and I think some very, very interesting game mechanics could be made out of them. So I hope people find this video useful and get experimenting with all of this. So I'll see you for the next video. Later.